Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this webinar. I'm Bud Walder. I head up the marketing team for DataMotion, and with us today is Michael Osterman, the principal analyst at Osterman Research. Mike, how are you today?
Doing well, Bud. How about yourself?
Good, I'm good. How's the weather out there in the Pacific Northwest?
You know, it's beautiful today. It's nice and sunny, and we only get about 75 days like this per year, so really enjoying it today.
Oh, nice. I'm here in the Atlantic Northeast, and we're looking a little cold and rainy again today, as it's been. So hopefully we'll get more of our warm weather coming. Anyway, let's get started. Our webinar today is best practices for using email encryption in Microsoft Office 365. And you may not know, but email is the most frequently implemented application in Office 365. It's essentially trading in traditional premise-based email exchange servers for Office 365 Cloud Email Service. But whether you're using a cloud service or a server-based email solution, your sensitive email really needs to be thoroughly secured when it's in transit. And a failure to properly encrypt email can lead to a loss of intellectual property, breaches of sensitive customer and employee information, and violations of data breach and privacy laws, and potentially very hefty fines. So over the next half hour, Michael and I will review the Office 365 environment, the reasons for securing email, and address some best practices for implementing and using email encryption. Then after the presentation, I'll pose some questions to Michael that the DataMotion team has prepared for him, kind of a stump the analyst, if you will, and then we'll also have some time for him to field your questions. And you can enter your questions at any time using the Ask a Question tab below the presentation window. You'll also see there a Vote tab for a couple polling questions we have for you, and a Rate This tab for grading the webinar at the end. So we hope you'll participate in those polling questions during the webinar and rate it after the webinar. That helps us get better. So before I hand things over to Mike, I'm pleased to note that DataMotion has also sponsored a survey report published by Osterman Research Team on Office 365 migration and deployment. And that report and that survey has a focus on the Exchange migration, so we think you'll find value in that as well, and we'll make that survey available to everyone after the webinar. So with those housekeeping things, we will turn things over to our featured speaker, Michael Osterman. Michael?
Well, Bud, thank you very much, and I'd like to thank everybody who's here with us today. Just a little bit of background on Osterman Research so you get our perspective on where we're coming from. We're an independent market research and consulting firm. We've been around for about 16 years, and our focus is really the way that people communicate or collaborate in the workplace. And so, obviously discussing email encryption is very much one of our key focus areas. We have a strong emphasis on primary research. We talk to decision makers and influencers all the time, run lots of surveys. We're running actually 3 this week, as a matter of fact. And our intent really is to understand, the problems that organizations are experiencing, how they'd like to solve them, what they think of vendors, et cetera, et cetera. We ask lots of questions really to understand what's going on in the industry. So let's get started here. Essentially what we're talking about today is email. And if you look in the popular press and the trade press, you very often will find that people are talking about the demise of email, that as millennials come into the workforce, they want to use tools like Slack, or they want to use text messaging or social media tools, really this whole variety of communication and collaboration tools that supposedly is supplanting email. Well, what we find in our own research is that email continues to be the primary form of communication in the workplace. When we do surveys with end users, we consistently find that the typical email user will send a median of about 30 emails a day, and they'll receive a median of about 100. Now, there's a lot of variability there, but those are pretty good averages, and those stay consistent over time. We also find that the typical user will spend about 2.5 hours per day doing something in email. Now, that's not just sending and receiving email. That's using email as their contact manager, as their task manager, looking for old information, using it basically as a launch pad for a wide variety of other tasks. So email is still that primary thing that people do when they sit behind a computer. And as Bud noted, it's the most important application in Office 365. There are lots of tools available in 365, but email is still the most important thing that people use in that platform. Also, email continues to be the most common file sharing tool in the workplace. About a quarter of emails sent today will contain some sort of an attachment. And if you look at the traffic in the normal corporate email system, you'll find that about 98% of the bits that are flowing through it are actually files, not email communications themselves. And so email continues to be this really dominant communication tool, but also the dominant way that people share information. And so, yes, Slack is going to be increasing, and text messaging and lots of other tools, but email use is still going to be primary. And so it's absolutely essential that you secure it. And that's mainly because email is really not very secure. Email was never designed to be a very secure email platform. And so the fundamental problem is that even in, regulated industries to some extent, but pretty much for all of us, users will continue to send sensitive and confidential types of information in clear text without any sort of encryption. And that includes really sensitive stuff like protected health information, personally identifiable information, personal financial information, and really just this wide variety of stuff that is confidential, is sensitive, and absolutely needs to be encrypted, but today very often is not. It also includes things that are a little bit less sensitive, things like contracts or invoices or purchase orders, stuff that really should be encrypted, but that isn't necessarily subject to specific regulatory requirements. And also there's a whole range of stuff that today is sent usually in clear text without any sort of encryption, and that doesn't really have to be, but it really would be nice if it was. Things like marketing plans or business plans, financial projections, things that today we will just, we'll send an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document, we'll send it off to somebody without it being encrypted, and it really should be just in case it's sent to the wrong party, or if it's, it somehow falls into the wrong hands. And with regard to stuff that, is accidentally sent to the wrong person, a Stroz-Friedberg study found that about 3 out of 5 senior managers have accidentally sent the wrong person sensitive information. And that's really easy to do. Because of the type ahead feature in Outlook or, pretty much any email client that you're using. And about a quarter of workers overall have done so. So this is a very common thing. I know I have done it. I have received information, I've received purchase orders and various types of sensitive information that I wasn't supposed to get because my name was similar to somebody else's in an address book somewhere. So bottom line is that email is really quite vulnerable to interception, either through mistakes or, in some cases through people accidentally hacking in, as we'll discuss in just a bit. Okay, and we're ready for our first poll here. Bud, if you want to run that. And basically it's, we just want to find out, if you think email should be encrypted.
Yeah, so you can see there on your screen what percentage of emails in your organization do you think should be encrypted? And more choices there, less than 5%, 5 to 25%, 26 to 50, and more than 50%. And again, use the poll tab below the presentation window to respond, and you should start seeing results in real time as the crowd starts answering. If you're viewing in full screen mode, you do need to escape out so that you can answer the poll questions.
It'll be interesting to see what kind of results we get here because we'll be discussing next certain results from our survey that talked about how much email should be encrypted.
Right. Well, this is kind of surprising. People are saying more than 50%. So there's a recognition out there that the insecure part of email is something that is dangerous and needs to be controlled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so.
Great. So more than 50%.
Yeah, that's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly that's going to...
go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say that's going to vary quite a bit based on the industry you're in, but certainly very interesting results.
Yeah.
So why don't we go to the survey data? And essentially what we found is when we're talking to a wide cross-section of end users, which the survey represents across a number of industries, organization sizes, and so forth, we found that about 7 out of 10 emails don't need encryption. And those are things like, there's birthday cake down the hall at 3 o'clock, or their lunch requests, or they're, fairly innocuous types of communications that we all send in email. However, about 1/5 of email could use encryption. Those are things like maybe embargoed press releases or corporate policy statements or maybe ideas for new marketing plans, whatever they may be. It's not really highly sensitive stuff, but it would be nice if it was encrypted. And then finally, about 1 out of 9 messages absolutely have to be encrypted because they contain financial information about the company. Maybe they contain credit card numbers, employee records, things that either by statute or best practice really need to be encrypted. So if you go back to that stat on 30 emails per day being sent by the typical user, and we look at 250 days a year, that means that the typical information worker is sending about 7,500 emails per year. So if 11% of those need to be encrypted, that means there are 825 emails that the typical information worker sends that absolutely have to be encrypted, and in many cases today really aren't. So in an organization of just 500 users, we're looking at over 400,000 emails per year that absolutely have to be encrypted, again, because they contain protected health information, personally identifiable information of some kind. And very often those emails today are not being encrypted. They are being sent in in clear text. And that is a fundamental problem because sending email that should be encrypted but that is not can get an organization into a lot of trouble, as we'll be discussing here in just a couple of minutes. So email breaches are really quite common, and I won't go through all these obviously, but these came from just the last few weeks. And as you can see, a lot of organizations across a number of different types of industries are breaching records. They're accidentally sending records via email to the wrong party, or they're just for whatever reason these records are getting out. And the fundamental problem is that, as you can notice here, a lot of these are healthcare related. And the Office of Health and Human Services basically requires the breach of over 500 records to be reported on the Office of Civil Rights website. So there's a sort of public shaming that goes on if an organization in the healthcare field or that has healthcare data somehow breaches those records. But also 47 states have data breach notification requirements. And most of those basically say if you have a record on somebody in that state, even if you don't have an operation in that state, if you have a record that gets breached, you have to report it to the individual whose record was breached. And that might entail not only just the notification itself, but also purchasing, credit reporting services for a few years, or, taking on other types of remediation efforts. And those can be very expensive, very onerous. You get bad press, and just, there are lots of problems associated with that. Now, one of the benefits of encryption is that if a record is breached, if you accidentally send an encrypted file to the wrong party, in most cases, the data breach notification requirements are waived. It's not considered a data breach if you send an encrypted file to the wrong party, only when you send an unencrypted file. So it's important to have encryption just to protect yourself from the wide and growing variety of data breach notification requirements that are out there. Okay, it looks like we're ready for our second poll. Bud, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, great. Again, the poll response there is below the presentation window, but this particular question is really just wondering whether your organization has email encryption in place today. Have you already put a solution in place? Yes, no. Maybe some of you aren't sure whether you have one in place. Sometimes they're there, but the policy hasn't been widely distributed among the organization. And the last question there is no, but we're planning to implement at this point. So we'll let this one ride out there. Let's see. Got to switch back. Okay. Mike, we also had while we're in this break for this poll, we had a question come in from the audience. When talking about encryption, can you clarify between internal email and external email regarding the need to encrypt and what the difference might be there?
Sure. Certainly anything that is of a sensitive or confidential nature that goes outside the organization should be encrypted. So external email, absolutely, encryption is essential. If you're talking about internal, it varies, based on regulatory requirements within the company. It may be best practice. It may be corporate culture. You may not want to have end-to-end encryption in your company. And, there may be some reasons for that in terms of the ability to scan email for malware, for instance. Possibly it's, because of archiving considerations that you don't want to be archiving encrypted content that maybe somehow you can't get to in the future, depending upon what encryption system you've implemented. So certainly external, I would almost call it mandatory for sensitive information. Internal, it's almost on a case-by-case basis.
Great. Thanks for handling that. And I see that we've got a lot of results back from the poll, and based on the topic of our webinar today, I guess it's not that surprising that a large percentage have. It looks like 60% have something in place, but maybe you're in that transition period between premise-based Exchange and moving towards Office 365, and kind of curious what you should do with your email encryption when you make that transition. I'd also think email encryption's been around for a while, so a lot of organizations do have it, but they may have older solutions, and when you're making a migration from premise to cloud-based email, it's maybe a good time to reevaluate what you have and look for something that may be a little more effective or efficient for you. Any thoughts on that, Mike?
Yeah, very definitely. I agree. I mean, it's, there are a lot of legacy encryption solutions out there. So an organization may have email encryption in place today, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all of their users are employing it. You may have a manual solution where you have a button in Outlook, for example, and users may forget to click the button, or they may decide that, their experience with senders receiving encrypted content has been difficult in the past, and they don't want to put users through that for something that, maybe isn't extremely sensitive or confidential.
Great. Okay, well, let's keep moving forward.
Sounds good. So let's discuss Office 365. As Bud noted, 365 is really very popular, and lots of organizations are adopting it. And Office 365 really represents Microsoft's third major foray into the cloud-based or hosted Exchange business. They started back in the late 1990s, and with some limited success, and they came out with BPOS and had a little more success. But with Office 365, they have really hit their stride. We've done a number of surveys looking at the adoption patterns for Office 365, and what we're finding is, is that by about the end of 2018, the majority of business users will be using some version of Office 365 or Exchange Online, which is basically the email component within 365. And 365 is perceived to be, and usually is, less expensive than on-premises Exchange. So that's one of the primary drivers for organizations to adopt Office 365 and Exchange Online, mainly because it's cheaper. You don't need internal IT staff to manage it to nearly the same extent as you would, let's say, with on-premises Exchange. And so this ends up being a win-win. Microsoft has told financial analysts that they will make anywhere from 20 to 80% more from their customers because they're switching to cloud-based email, and end users save money because they don't have to have nearly as many internal IT staff to manage things. But Microsoft is going to be making more money because you don't skip versions of Exchange and so forth. So basically, it's a win-win for everybody. It enables greater corporate agility in many cases. There's much more predictable cost forecasting because you know what your cost of email is going to be. There really aren't any surprises. There can be enhanced user productivity because now all end users have everything from whatever platform they're on. So they have email and productivity apps and voicemail, voice over IP and so forth. Makes for more efficient IT operations because now you can put your IT staff on things that will really provide more value to the company rather than just managing Exchange servers or other types of servers, patching them, updating them, and so forth. And fundamentally, you get potentially better corporate communications with Office 365 than you would with an entirely on-premises environment. So, this really ends up being a very good win for just about everybody. And, suffice it to say that Office 365 is a pretty good platform. Microsoft has done quite a good job here, and they've enabled a lot of capabilities. Their uptime is very good and has improved dramatically over the last couple of years. So it's really a pretty good platform. Now, there is encryption available in Office 365. It's called Office 365 Message Encryption, or OME, and it's a decent offering. It does provide some nice encryption capabilities. OME requires the purchase of Microsoft Azure Rights Management, or ARM, and Office 365 plans E3 or Enterprise 3 and above already include ARM. Encryption can be set up in Office 365 using Exchange transport rules. Messages are encrypted at the gateway using policy rules, which is a good approach, and it's very inexpensive. It's priced at $2 per user per month. So this is a decent offering. It provides a lot of pretty good capabilities, but there are some things to consider in the context of encryption capabilities within 365. First, OME or Information Rights Management or SMIME are all available in Office 365 environments, but there are limitations on each of those options. For example, OME doesn't allow the application of usage restrictions to emails, and so you don't have a lot of the capabilities with OME that you might have in third-party solutions. There's not complete support for information rights management emails across the board, so it is going to be limited in that sense. And SMIME doesn't allow encrypted emails to be scanned. So, again, there are some limitations in each of these options that you do need to consider as you move forward with encryption. Also, outside desktop recipients of an OME message have to do one of the following to view the message. First, they have to sign in either with an Office 365 account if they have one, or they have to sign in with their own Microsoft account, and then they have to sign in with a one-time passcode. And if you're dealing with somebody that doesn't already have either Office 365 or a Microsoft account, they're going to have to create one in order to receive an encrypted message that you send to them through OME. And that can create a problem because you do have to provide some, semi-sensitive information when you create a Microsoft account. You do have to provide name and, contact information and so forth. Not everybody's going to necessarily want to do that, and that's particularly onerous for mobile users who are working on a small screen and maybe have some time sensitivity associated with their receipt of an encrypted email. Also, mobile recipients of an OME message have to do something to view the message. Either download the OME Viewer app that's available for either iOS or Android, and that's a free app, but it does have to be downloaded if it already hasn't been. And on other mobile devices, the encrypted HTML attachment can be opened if the mail client supports form post. So, again, these are not tremendously onerous things, but they do present a barrier to receiving an encrypted message that's been sent through Office 365. Also, if an encrypted reply is sent via the encryption portal, or if you're using the OME Viewer app to receive the message, the sending email address is as you see it here. It's office365@messaging.microsoft.com. Again, not a huge issue, but it is a problem for some senders who, where the email actually may get sent off to a spam quarantine because it's not coming from the sending address. Also, URLs for Exchange Online have to be added to the allow list for encrypted messages to work. Encrypted OME messages can't be revoked after they're sent, and that can be a problem because if you're sending an encrypted message, very often it contains, highly sensitive or highly confidential information, and you want to have control over that. You want to maybe set an expiration time so that it expires 24 hours after it's sent. You can't do that with OME. Also, there aren't any reports that show if an encrypted message has been viewed. And again, if you're sending really sensitive content, you want to make sure that the recipient has actually received it and been able to view it. And also, Microsoft uses its own certificates. Again, not a huge issue, but it is going to be a problem for some organizations. So there are some questions you want to ask as you're considering encryption, regardless of the encryption platform you're using. First, do messages need to be encrypted inbox to inbox, or is gateway to gateway sufficient? That can be a problem for some organizations. Again, as I noted, if you're encrypting between inboxes, it can be a problem for archiving. If you're encrypting just between the gateways, it means that the message is in clear text, behind the firewall on both sides of that gateway. Do you need automatic decryption of inbound messages? And that's a very nice capability to have, instead of having to go into a special app or doing, jumping through hoops to be able to read an encrypted message. That automatic decryption for the recipient is a very definite nice feature to have. Do you want recipients to be able to receive encrypted messages without having to set up a Microsoft account or already be on Office 365? For most organizations, that's going to be a yes, because the world hasn't fully shifted to Office 365 and probably won't. I mean, there are still going to be a lot of other email platforms in use, over the next few years. And it's going to be nice to be able to send those encrypted messages to anyone without requiring the non-Microsoft customers to do extra steps to read your encrypted messages. Do you want senders to be able to determine if and when recipients have received an encrypted message? Again, that control for senders is very important for some types of messages, and it's also just a nice to have, having that capability over setting message expiration times and so forth. Because setting message expiration times and knowing when people have read your emails is really a very important feature in many cases. So in summary, email is still king. We anticipate that email is still going to be the primary way that people communicate or collaborate for many years to come. Even if you look at some of the new tools that are out there, they continue to use email as the paradigm. So email is still going to be part of most of the collaboration and communication tools that we see out there, even if they're supposedly meant to replace email. Email is fundamentally insecure. It was never designed to be a secure platform, and if you're sending sensitive or confidential information, you really have to encrypt it with a layer on top of email. Office 365 does offer some pretty decent email encryption capabilities, and they will suffice for some portion of the user base. Our research shows that most organizations are going to want third-party solutions for encryption simply because of the limitations with OMB and the other encryption capabilities within 365. And fundamentally, third-party encryption offers better capabilities in many cases, and it provides a better and an easier user experience. Okay, here is our contact information, and Bud, I'd like to hand things over to you now.
Thanks, Mike. That was a really great analysis. Thanks so much for that. When I look at it, in many ways, the decision to use a solution or a function that's made available in a product suite versus investing in a best-of-breed solution really comes up pretty frequently in our technology choices. So, here we have it again with Office 365 message encryption. I think, those choices generally come down to how well the features and functions are implemented in the suite versus, a purpose-built application, and also how important that particular function is to the business process or a security policy and a compliance policy. So we're going to discuss all that during the Q&A segment, but at this point I'd like to take a few minutes just to introduce DataMotion to you and touch on the highlights of our Office 365 compatible email encryption service, which is known as Secure Mail. So DataMotion is a Microsoft Gold application partner, and we've been providing secure data delivery services and solutions since 1999. Over that time, we've served just about every type of large and small organization, but the largest segments of our customer base are in heavily regulated industries, those that are handling lots of sensitive data, the ones you'd expect: healthcare, financial services, insurance, state and local governments, and large enterprises as well. So Secure Mail, as I noted, is our branded email encryption service suite with over about 5 million active users across our subscription service. We also do on-premise deployments and also with OEM partners like Dell SonicWall. And it's deployed very widely with Microsoft Outlook and Exchange, and now growing rapidly with Office 365 as well. And it's designed to help organizations elevate their compliance and security profiles with a goal of keeping it really simple for senders and recipients. So one way we simplify the sender experience is with our Outlook Send Secure button. It's a plugin for Microsoft Outlook, and it provides a one-click encryption from the desktop, and it can encrypt end-to-end messages quickly and easily. On the recipient's end, access to encrypted messages is also a one-step process, which DataMotion pioneered actually and patented in 2004. Also focused on recipient experience is our Safe TLS sending option. So this sending option takes advantage of pretty widespread use now of transport layer security or TLS. That's available across a lot of personal email services and also public servers and private servers as well. And it's a secure tunnel that allows emails and attachments to be exchanged securely, but without any heavy encryption keys or passwords required. So everything arrives in the clear, no extra steps are required for recipients, and they really love that, of course. Of course, our Safe TLS implementation verifies the secure TLS tunnel is there. If it's not, it drops back to standard encrypted exchange methods, so you're sure that your email is being sent secure. Another unique benefit you get with Secure Mail is our secure file transfer feature. With every Secure Mail account, users can also exchange files all the way up to 2 gigabytes securely and with just about anyone. And users and admins have complete tracking, visibility, and reporting on those file exchanges. And this feature actually can also be fully automated and integrated into existing systems and workflows. Some research indicates when it comes to mobility and email on mobility, some research shows that almost 70% of business email is first viewed from a mobile device. So clearly the mobile experience for email encryption is very important. What we've done is optimize the Secure Mail user interface for mobile devices, so no app is needed for the sender or recipient. And also for heavy users on the sender side, Secure Mail POP3 email account can be set up, which adds a lot of simplicity for the sender as well. And then as mentioned earlier, for most of our customers, regulatory compliance is a primary driver for email encryption. So they place a really high value on our total view reporting system. The Secure Mail is built on a secure governed database platform, trust no one design, but it logs everything and tracks everything, every Secure Mail email transaction and file transfer. So you get all the details on delivery, on opens. It even does time and date stamps for when attachments were accessed or opened or downloaded. So that provides a lot of great control and visibility, provides lots of confidence in the event of a breach or an audit. In many of our larger customers, they've got high volume repetitive workflow processes where they're exchanging protected health or financial information, very routinely through their business processes. So they're often working, their users are often working within productivity apps or CRMs like Salesforce, or in contact center applications or mobile applications. And so secure workflow integration makes the secure email and file exchange capabilities available to users right within the business process, right within that user interface. So Secure Mail has a whole range of connectors and protocols and web service APIs that enable that integration into workflows and mobile apps, as I noted. And that kind of supports all types of digital process transformations across those industries like healthcare and insurance and finance, where they're doing a lot of work with sensitive information, government as well. The last service I want to touch on is DataMotion Direct Secure Messaging. It's kind of unique. It's a separate companion service to secure mail, but it's really a specialty email encryption type standard and a nationwide service actually for expressly sharing electronic health records. I noted that a lot of folks that signed up for the webinar today are in the healthcare space. This service is fully interoperable and works with virtually every electronic health record system on the market. So, as you see, there are over 350 EHR systems use it, and it's connected to about 1.4 million doctors, clinicians, clinical care facilities nationwide at this point. So it's growing very rapidly. So if you're working in clinical healthcare with clinical healthcare data, electronic medical records, direct secure messaging can be a real advantage and provide a lot of efficiency and interoperability and value to your processes. So I appreciate you letting me share that overview on DataMotion and our Office 365 compatible secure mail and the direct secure messaging products and services as well. But now let's get back to our featured analyst, Mike Osterman, and we'll work on some questions on Office 365 message encryption best practices. Mike, are you ready for that?
Sounds good.
Okay, great. Well, as I noted, we queued up a few of them from the DataMotion team just to kick things off, and then we'll get to the audience questions. But we'll start off with one kind of just for fun, but also not getting too political. But certainly we all know that email security had a very outsized role in the presidential campaign in 2016. Is it possible for you to speculate how much the simple use of email encryption may have avoided that kind of impact?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's hard to say exactly what impact it would have had because there were a lot of moving parts here. But certainly email encryption keeps things private. And so, the internal communications within the DNC, the external communications and so forth, if all of those had been encrypted, that would have provided an extra layer of security that might have avoided a lot of the problems that they experienced. It's particularly true in a variety of industries like healthcare or financial services, but it really just applies to anybody. And if you're sending sensitive information, in this case, change your password or don't change your password, whatever the case may be, if you're sending that encrypted, then you've got that extra layer of protection that you otherwise wouldn't have if you're sending things in clear text. So, bottom line, could it have avoided the problems? Very, very definitely could have.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for explaining that. A lot of people just, really don't understand how, traditional email is not secure, and so certainly we see a lot of uptake now. We do a lot of work in government, but not on campaigns typically. Anyway, let's get to another question here, specific to organizations. When you talk about the risks of, not encrypting customer protected health information or personal identifiable information or financial information when sending an email, what's worse actually, accidental exposure and user error, or or what's the bigger risk, I guess, accidental exposure and user error, or actual bad actors or hackers sniffing out the unencrypted data in motion? And does that really matter from a regulator's perspective if you have a breach?
Well, to answer the second question first, it really doesn't matter. If you've breached data, you've breached it. And so you have to go through all the steps to remediate that. Certainly I think the bigger problem is user error, simply because there are so many more users. And if you're sending 30 emails a day on average and there's 1,000 users in your company, then, if 11% of that information absolutely has to be encrypted, you're looking at thousands of potential problems every day that are occurring. And if just one of those occurs, then you've got a breach and you've then got to deal with it. And it's, very often, as I mentioned, when people send an email that contains, let's say, a spreadsheet of sensitive information to the wrong party, the receiving party will recognize that. If the sender contacts them, they'll delete it, and the problem is gone. It's still a regulatory problem, but from the perspective of the data actually getting out, it's not an issue. However, there are some cases where the sender really, or the recipient, isn't quite so nice. There was one case a couple of years ago where the recipient wouldn't promise that they had deleted the information, and this was sent through Gmail, and so Gmail had to get involved, and it was just a very, very messy situation. So the best course of action is to encrypt it so you don't run into those situations, and thereby you can negate virtually all user errors.
Yeah. We often see, and you had a list of of breaches that have happened just in the last couple months. But sometimes the fines can be just massive. Are the fines adjusted depending on how much you tried to encrypt, or whether you just were ignoring it, or how are those fines levied? How are they really assessed?
Well, generally, if you encrypt the content, you're pretty much exempt. Not necessarily in every case, but in most cases, you'll be exempt from any penalties or any other consequences of the breach, because it's not really considered a breach. If I send you employee records in an encrypted file, that's really not a breach, because there's almost no way you could ever get to those records. Where you do run into problems is where the data is unencrypted, and then even if nothing bad happens, it's still considered a breach. And it depends a lot on the regulator, whether it's FINRA or the Office of Civil Rights, or whoever is really the governing party here. It depends a lot on their level of tolerance, the number of breaches that have occurred in the past. First time is probably not going to be as severe a penalty as multiple infractions. But there was a case in St. Louis for a hospital that accidentally had faxed 2 records to the wrong party, and they ended up with, I think it was something like a $380,000 fine for just a breach of 2 records. And if you go to privacyrights.org, you can actually take a look at all of the records. They maintain a pretty good database of records that have been breached through a variety of means. People sending the wrong email, sending it unencrypted, losing a laptop, whatever the case may be. And you can actually sort by type, by industry, by year. It's pretty informative. And if you're responsible for managing records in your company or managing email, it's a very scary place to go, because once you look at the things in that database, you realize that probably is going to be happening or has happened in your own organization.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to Office 365. As I mentioned at the start, you conducted a survey last year on its migration and deployment in I think over 100 mid to large organizations. Can you tell us a little bit about that survey and what were some of the more interesting results?
Sure. Yeah, we've actually done several surveys on Office 365 adoption, and what we're consistently finding is that over the next couple of years, we're going to see a pretty massive shift to Office 365 compared to on-premises solutions. And Microsoft is intentionally doing that. They want to move their on-premises Exchange user base to an Office 365 user base. And there are lots of advantages, as we noted, to Microsoft, both from a financial perspective, but also for end users. It's really a very good idea as well. Not only do you get this wide variety of tools, and Office 365 comes in, I think, 14 different SKUs at this point. So there are lots of flavors, lots of plans out there. But also things are continually updated. As I noted, the uptime is really very good. It didn't used to be so good, now it is. And so, we're seeing this pretty much wholesale adoption. It's it's not going to be everybody moving to 365, but a pretty big chunk of the market.
Well, we've done it ourselves here. Of course, we're also using Secure Mail with it, and works great together. But we find Office 365 to be a terrific platform for email and our other applications as well, the other applications we use within it. But within that survey, I was looking at it the other day, and the response to one of the questions, I guess, could really strike fear in the hearts of independent email encryption vendors like DataMotion. So one of the questions asked if the survey respondents thought that Office 365 message encryption would provide sufficient security for their email encryption needs, and a pretty high percentage said they thought it would. So what should we do? Should companies like DataMotion just find something else to do? Is it game over? Or I know you've answered some of that already, but gotta check again.
Well, yeah, it's definitely not game over. I think one of the interesting things about Office 365, like just about any new product out there, is that you see a capability in a data sheet and say, well, that's the checkbox. That will satisfy our needs here. But then when you start getting into the weeds, you say, well, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that. I have this scenario where it's not going to work as well. And I think that's certainly the case with OME, with Office 365 Message Encryption. Like I said, it's a decent offering, and it has some nice encryption capabilities. But when you start getting complaints from mobile users, who have difficulty downloading a message or have to go through extra steps, what have you, then you start realizing that, okay, let's start looking at a third-party solution. And I think that's where most organizations are. Microsoft provides some pretty good capabilities out of the box, in this case, at a pretty low price point. But then you start to look at the limitations, you experience the difficulties, and you say, well, let's move to a third-party solution to provide a better user experience on the sending end, on the receiving end, and so forth. And, we see that in the context of security offerings, for advanced threat protection. We see it in archiving, where the native Office 365 archiving is okay, but it's not going to satisfy every need from an e-discovery perspective, for example. And certainly we're seeing the same thing with encryption. It'll satisfy some needs, but not most. Yeah.
So some of the questions we're seeing, and maybe it has to do with some of the points I made. Does Office 365 encryption handle extra large files? Does it make any provision for oversized file exchange, to your knowledge?
It does. It does allow large files to be sent. I don't know what the upper limit is. I think it's something like 150 megabytes, and that's probably going to suffice for most users. It's a little bit smaller for Mac users, I think, but still pretty sizable. But then you run into scenarios where people are sending very large files that need to be encrypted, and that's not going to suffice. But I think for just normal communications where you're sending Word or PowerPoint or Excel files, it's going to suffice in most cases.
One more here, and then we'll go some more questions from the audience. There's so much market momentum and practical support for software as a service and cloud computing. Are there still some arguments for deploying solutions on premise and in private data centers, both Exchange as well as email encryption solutions?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and we find that in our research. There are a lot of situations where an organization may have email generating applications, and to rewrite those for the cloud is just not going to be cost effective. So they're going to maintain some level of on-premises capability to support those. Some organizations will use email, tie that into the infrastructure for copiers and scanners and printers and so forth. And also, if you look at email that's used for some on-premises activities, if you're going to the cloud a lot, that means you've got a lot of upstream and downstream traffic, and it can create some bandwidth inefficiencies that you have to take into account as well. And also there are some industries, government, financial services, healthcare, where you just want to have things on premises, either because of regulatory requirements or because legal counsel has advised you to do that, whatever the case may be. There's still a need for on premises. And our data shows lots of different research studies that we've done have shown that on-premises is not going away. You're getting a lot of users to go to the cloud, but you're still going to have a lot supported on-premises. And for mid-sized and particularly large organizations, we're going to see a lot of hybrid deployments where you have, and even all Microsoft shops, you'll still have a lot of Exchange users used at the same time with Office 365.
Interesting. We recently had a large state Department of Corrections deployment where they needed to keep everything on premise in a secure data center, actually for CJIS compliance with the FBI, Criminal Justice Information Systems, where the data center is actually like behind bulletproof plexiglass, and the guys have sidearms, that type of thing, just because of the FBI regulations for keeping background checked information and other criminal information completely private and encrypted and locked down. So they needed to stay on premise for that reason.
Yeah, and then you run into data sovereignty issues as well. with data sovereignty, I mean, there are some, particularly in Europe, some data has to reside within the country in which it was created. So, that's an issue for a lot of non-U.S. companies, for example, because of the Patriot Act. They want to maintain things, on premises to protect it. They need to ensure that it's not going to be stored in the United States, and Microsoft can't necessarily guarantee that in all cases.
Right. Great. Thanks. Okay, we've got time for just a couple more. I've got a question here about, I guess, some of the statistics around Office 365 migration. Can you repeat the percentage of orgs that are projected to use Office 365?
Sure. Yeah, we anticipate that by the end of 2018, 50% of organizations are going to be on Office 365, and it's pretty much going to flop from on-premises Exchange to Office 365. And if you'd like, I can actually send you the charts. Whoever had that question, just send an email to info@ostermanresearch.com, and I'll send you off the chart that shows our most recent survey data on that.
Ah, that's great. Thanks, Mike. Here's another one here. Can you explain the OMB limitation about application of usage restrictions? Must have come off one of the slides. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do. Yeah, basically, I mean, what we're talking about is with OME, you don't have the full range of sender capabilities that you'll have with some third-party solutions, like being able to set expiration times, and inability to move, to copy, forward, and print, and so forth. So, I mean, there are more capabilities in third-party solutions that senders have. There's more features and functions that senders have available to them when they're sending an encrypted email than you'll find in OME.
Great. Okay. And here's one from a recent attack that we're all familiar with. What is the vulnerability, or is there additional vulnerability with Office 365 more so than other email services or premise email services when it comes to attacks like the WannaCry phishing attack?
Boy, that's a good question. It's potentially any cloud-based service is going to be a bigger target. Because if you can penetrate, let's say Office 365 servers or Gmail servers, you potentially have access to more data, more users, and so forth. I don't think that's been borne out empirically. I don't think we have seen, cloud-based services more vulnerable. In fact, if you look at some of the biggest data breaches out there, most of them have been using on-premises systems. So that doesn't mean the cloud is invulnerable, but it's, so far at least the cloud has at least a bit of a better track record there.
Great. Well, we're coming up on the end of our session here. I want to thank everyone for joining. A couple people have asked if the slides will be available, and we will make them available after the webinar to the folks that have attended and registered. So thanks everyone for joining. I want to give a special thanks for our featured guest and analyst, Mike Osterman. Really appreciate the work you did here for us, Mike, and all the in-depth presentation and responses to the questions that we had. And if everyone with the BrightTalk presentation tool here also gives you an opportunity to rate the webinar, we'd appreciate it. And of course, that'll help us make sure we keep on putting better and better content out there for you that's useful. So with that, thanks again, Mike, and thanks everybody for joining, and we'll sign off.